Folks, welcome back. Okay, we're going to get very serious right now. I have Rod Martin of the Rod Martin Report on with me. Rod, what can you tell us about the extraction we did of Mamdani from a bunker in Greenland? Or am I getting the details?
Well, that would be nice. The operation in Caracas was flawless. Could not have gone better. We lost 0 lives to capture one of the major drug kingpins of the world. And we have to understand Venezuela that way. It started out as a socialist nightmare, and it turned into a cartel that had captured a country, of which Maduro was the head. And, Delta Force goes in, nabs him without a single life lost.
But wait a minute. If we had done this properly and gone to Congress, there would have been many lives lost because it would have been leaked.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Thomas Massey was on X this morning complaining about exactly that. And, I just marvel at this. First of all, if this were a war, which it isn't, but if it were, the War Powers Act is quite clear that the president has 48 hours to notify Congress after hostilities commence. So everybody pretending that he did something wrong here with regard to Congress is just smoking crack. It's ridiculous. Second, he doesn't need a declaration of war to execute an arrest warrant. And that arrest warrant was sought by the Biden Justice Department. Maduro and his wife were indicted by a U.S. grand jury under the Biden administration, and it was Biden's team that withdrew from him any diplomatic immunity, making this arrest possible.
Okay,
the same Democrats who thought that was great are horrified once Trump actually does something about it.
I'm gonna play the role of George Stephanopoulos and ask some questions here. So what I don't understand, not that I particularly care, I just ask this because I trust Trump, I trust this administration, but I think there are certain questions that often aren't addressed or clarified. Obviously, when we make an arrest, we can make an arrest anywhere within the United States, but to go into another country, I can see how people would get confused about that.
Well, they can get confused, but they need to read the law. You may disagree with U.S. law, as many people do on many different points, but the law is very clear. We absolutely have the right to do any such thing because the crimes committed were against the United States and against United States citizens. So we really don't care if Al Capone runs to South Africa. We're going to go get him. And Nicolas Maduro has been running the biggest drug smuggling operation that exists into the United States. Is it the only one? No. Should those other guys be concerned? Yes. Ask El Chapo. But it's not just drugs either. As you know, that's one piece of this. That's certainly the legitimacy of the arrest. But Maduro also is supplying tremendous amounts of oil to the degree that his socialist klepto state can still produce any oil. They're down about 80% in their ability to produce because they mismanaged their own infrastructure so badly. But that oil goes to Russia and China. So we're cutting off sanctioned oil that is propping up Cuba, propping up Putin, and of course, helping the communist Chinese, who are doing everything they can, along with the Iranians and the Russians. Who would even think of the Iranians in the Western Hemisphere? But the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese establishing significant military and intelligence presences in the Western Hemisphere, operating from Venezuela, which, in case anybody missed it, is just across that ocean out there from where I'm sitting. So, we're not talking about something halfway around the world. We're talking about a 3 or 4 hour flight. And this has to be dealt with. The president dealt with it brilliantly. My guess is you're now going to see Cuba in a world of hurt. I don't know how they survive the year. And in addition to that, you're going to see Venezuela transition to the free market democracy that it ought to be. And I don't think that's going to take any meaningful boots on the ground at all.
Again, playing the role of George Stephanopoulos, I guess people, well, there's a few things. First of all, we know that there's so many pieces to this. That's, I think, the genius of it on Trump's part.
Yes.
That he's saying this is not a win-win. This is a win-win-win-win-win. This is so many things at once. First of all,
yes,
he is putting the hurt big time to every one of our enemies. Every single one of our enemies. China
all at once,
freaking out. Iran freaking out. We can talk about Iran in a minute. Freaking out. Russia freaking out. Whatever. And I think, again, we've never seen this in our lifetimes. We've never seen someone who has the ability to exercise authority and leadership on this level. We've simply never seen it. Trump knows that he's doing good for the whole world by doing this. And he knows everybody's going to scream. They're going to say, excuse me, what about this? What about this? I mean, the UN Security Council, I want to fall on the floor with laughter. They're meeting to discuss. Does anyone in the world care what the UN Security Council cares? I mean, it's just,
especially not since we're just going to veto anything stupid they might do.
But I mean, I think Trump, again, when we start thinking, where can we go with this? I think he should bulldoze the UN building into the East River at this point. It's like, come and get me, UN Army peacekeepers. It is so preposterous that we have even allowed them to exist on American soil. They are in bed with thugs and dictators. So this morning, they're getting together to discuss, or today to discuss this. There's tremendous comedy here, but let's talk about the big picture. The theft. Trump keeps talking about the communists. Chavez seized American assets. ExxonMobil, Phillips Conoco, gigantic American companies that had invested billions in Venezuela. So the communists come in under Chavez and basically take it and then say, well, we'll pay you back. And they never pay us back. So they stole what belongs to us. And every useless president until now has done nothing about this.
Well, and this has been arbitrated in multiple international fora. This has been taken to the International Court of Justice every single time the American companies win, and Venezuela just thumbs their nose at them. So, okay, we're not going to apologize anymore for that shockingly expensive U.S. military that you and I pay for every April 15th, actually enforcing the property rights of American citizens. Not apologizing. Sorry. And I know we've had people all over the media this weekend going on, no blood for oil. Well, first of all, we didn't shed any blood. We lost nobody. And second, actually, it's America's job to protect the rights of Americans. Now, how does that benefit Venezuela? Well, first of all, it doesn't have to, but it does. And we're proud that it does, because the deal that the socialists broke, was a 50-50 split. The Venezuelans provide nothing except access to the oil fields. The American companies come in, put up all the investment, all the technology, all of the risk. Every bit of risk is on them. And then they split it 50-50 with Venezuela. Okay, how is this bad for Venezuela? And the truth is, we've seen how good it was, because since the socialists nationalized those fields, their production has dropped 80%. This is a country that's sitting on the largest proved oil reserves on earth. They can't feed themselves.
I just read that the worth of the oil in Venezuela is 17 trillion. Trillion.
That we know of.
And
there's really only one market for it, because though the Chinese are buying it, and certainly the Venezuelans are using it to subsidize Cuba, and the Russians are dependent on this same shadow fleet that the Venezuelans are using, doesn't change the fact that the refineries on Earth best optimized for this particular kind of oil are all on the U.S. Gulf Coast. So for Venezuela to prosper, they need to be able to sell to the United States. So again, win, 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 win.
Well, just to make it simple, right? It's sort of like I buy a big piece of land in Texas. Somebody discovers oil on the land. I, with my writing hands, don't know how to extract oil.
No.
So somebody
and you
comes
don't have
in
the money
and says, listen, we're going to make you very, very rich. We know how to extract the oil. Give us permission to extract the oil. We will extract the oil. We'll give you 50%. Deal. Everybody becomes a billionaire. It's kind of simple.
Well,
that's what.
Yeah,
that's
and
what
if you
we
were
do.
in Midland, you as the landowner would get 20% royalty. Venezuela was getting 50% royalty. There's no way this is unfair. This is not American companies exploiting poor third worlders. No, this was American companies making everybody rich together. And that's the essence of the Trump doctrine.
It's the Don Rowe doctrine, I believe. I checked the history books. The Don Rowe doctrine. So
Yes.
it's so the thing is that we I mean, again, you can understand that there's a history when you think about colonialism. I'm writing now about the British Empire and how they really did exploit the people of India. They exploited people. We know there's a history of power being used wrongly, of exploiting people. America is not in the business of doing that at present. I mean, the United Fruit Company or whatever it was, we have had a past where we've been guilty of some of that. I frankly do not believe that we would stand for it at this point. It's not 1950. It's 2026. We're not interested in exploiting people. What we're interested in doing is helping people get out of the poverty that comes to you when you're under a communist dictatorship, and enabling people to govern themselves. So I really do think, it's not like like Rubio's going to become the viceroy of Venezuela.
Although they'd benefit from that.
But the point is that, well, it's when people like Stephanopoulos is asking, so who's running Venezuela? Hey, let's be honest. You know who was running it a week ago? Nobody. It was just in free fall. And as all communist dictatorships are, nobody's running anything. It's like saying, who's running Somalia? Who's running it? Nobody's running it. It's just a bunch of criminals stealing when they have an opportunity. It's an absolute mess. The infrastructure has broken down. So we're not talking about taking over Switzerland here. What we're going to do is go in there, ideally, and help them with their infrastructure, help them create a government. It was interesting what Trump said about Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize recently. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's important to remember that Machado didn't win the election. Machado was the opposition leader, but backed a different candidate because she was barred from standing. So when he says she isn't likely to become president, short of a new election, she isn't. I mean, she has no more legitimacy to be president than Maduro did. Now, how do you get to a transition? My guess is because this president doesn't seem very interested in invading and spending 20 years occupying anybody. My guess is that the threat couldn't be much clearer. We just indicted and arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife for conspiracy, and you guys are the co-conspirators. So play ball or you're next.
Or else.
And there's no question that we can take all of them if we want to, and they know it now. So my guess is you get a managed transition with a lot of kicking and screaming and complaining and everything else, and eventually you get to a freely elected, legitimate government. You give it a few months. It took 6 months after the loss of the Falklands War for the junta to devolve power on an elected government. I think you see something like that.
You're dating yourself and me by referring to the Falklands War. So let's, for the little children in the audience under 40, Let's just explain to them. Back in a magical time called the 1980s, there was a woman named Lady Thatcher. Actually, her name was not Lady Thatcher at the time. There was a President Reagan, and something happened in the Falkland Islands, they're off of Argentina. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. And it was kind of a similar thing where the world was shocked because England, Great Britain asserted its authority and went in there. Now, you want to talk about why we went in there?
Well, the British had colonized the Falklands a very, very long time ago, 1820s, if I recall correctly. And those islands have never belonged to Argentina in all of history. And there was a military junta in control of the country. They thought that this would buttress their power. It would be a walkover. You know, the British are half the world away. You know, there's just going to be no problem taking these islands of sheep herders.
And I'm pretty sure that they said, "Come and get us, cowards. We're waiting."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Just like Maduro. And Mrs. Thatcher did. She assembled an armada and sailed to the South Atlantic and kicked the Argentines out of a country that, by the way, speaks, like 100% English. They're all English people. So, the idea that the Argentines had any right to this is absurd. Well, needless to say, the political result of that at home was the exact opposite of what the generals had hoped for. They ended up losing power, and pretty quickly you had a democratic government. And I'm not going to pretend that it was the best in the world, but eventually you get to Javier Milei. So, it's better if people get to rule themselves, as Venezuela is about to get to do. I would just point out that if I'm going to talk about the Falklands, I have to talk about Taiwan. This is one of the great risks to the CCP. They're not stupid. They read history. They're aware of what happened to the Argentine dictatorship when they failed to take the Falklands. And so when Donald Trump sells Taiwan, the biggest arms package we've ever sold them just last month, and it's nearly all self-propelled howitzers that are aimed, of course, at landing craft hitting the beaches, and HIMARS that are going to hit them while they're in the Formosa Strait. You're reducing the risk that China can afford to try. And that's really the aim. We're not going to go attack the Three Gorges Dam. We're not going to go, kidnap Xi Jinping. We're going to make the steel more expensive than it's worth. And I think as we see China more and more in that box, you're going to start seeing a better and better trade regime as well. It was interesting that last month, while the Chinese are very upset about what the Japanese just said about their willingness to defend Taiwan and about the U.S. arms package for Taiwan, they nevertheless put out a feeler about investing in and co-developing the Trans-Alaska Pipeline for natural gas that we're about to develop. Why would they do that? Well, part of the reason is they realize the jig is up. They need energy. They need it cheap. And if they're going to have to deal with the United States anyway, they might as well make money on it. So I think we're seeing them increasingly corralled. We see Russia in an incredible bind here because of what's just happened in Venezuela, because that same shadow fleet is how they sell the oil that pays for their war. And as you said, all of our enemies are getting a dose of this at once.
I think that they're in meltdown. The idea that Cuba, I don't know how this plays out, but it's over. Ladies and gentlemen, It's over. Stick a fork in it. Cuba is over. Now, the question is the details. But the bottom line is we've choked them. They have they were relying on Russia. USSR, that's gone. So they turn, only eyes to Chavez and Venezuela, and then Maduro, that's gone. So they're being choked. Where do they go? China is obviously freaking out. We haven't even mentioned Iran.
No.
It seems that the Iranian regime, by the grace of the Lord, is going down. What is your sense of how that plays out?
That looks true. Let me just reference Cuba in that connection. the logical players to try to step in and replace the welfare that Chavez and Maduro gave Cuba would be Iran and Russia and China. But that depends on shipments of sanctioned oil. The Chinese don't have any oil, so that's not coming from them. It would have to come from Iran and Russia. Those guys are under sanctions, and Trump just started capturing shadow fleet tankers. So they're not going to be able to get oil to Cuba. Cuba's just toast. And they couldn't have survived the last 20 years without Chavez and Maduro propping them up. So that is a nascent Russian Chinese base of operations, somewhat military, mostly intelligence against the United States that just got a lot harder to maintain in the absence of Venezuela. Now, Iran, as you see, we've got real protests in the streets to a degree that looks regime threatening. The last time we had something like that, the regime acted, in a very bloody fashion within 2 or 3 days. This has now been going on for a week, and they haven't acted, which suggests significant regime weakness. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But my guess is we've got a real shot at seeing the restoration of the Shah reasonably imminently. And that would look like Spain in the 70s. That would look like the transition from Franco to a constitutional monarchy that results in a democracy. And that would be a boon to the world. Iran, as a major oil producer that isn't threatening everybody with terrorist groups and nukes, is one of our best allies in the world. The Iranian people love America, and there are a shocking number of Iranians in the United States who fled after the fall of the Shah. But Iran, before 79, was also a key ally to Israel. So the entire region gets safer, and nobody so much as the GCC, because the other Gulf states are not going to be threatened by a regime led by Reza Pahlavi. That's just not happening. So these wars just go away.
What is the GCC?
The Gulf Cooperation Council. That's Saudi Arabia
and
the
UAE
I knew that,
and their neighbors. Rod, you thought I knew what that was, the GCC?
I assume you know everything.
I do. But there's 5 things I don't know. That was one of them. And the other 4, my producer, Chris, knows. So we've got everything covered. But we're talking about so many things, and that's the delight of all of this, that this is a staggering reset. This is an historical, staggering reset. It's like 1776 all over again. You're in a new era. You're in a new world, or at least we're on the verge of a new world that we couldn't have thought of 1 year ago. Couldn't have thought of it. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, a year ago, Biden, the auto pen, was president of the United States. We have come so far, and we know that Trump and his people have been, war gaming this for months to play out. Where does this go? How do we set up this and this and this so that when we pull the trigger, these other things fall into place? I mean, the situation with Cuba, the situation with Iran, why do you suppose? I think sometimes that Trump does this again just to troll his enemies. To mention Greenland yesterday is just next level beautiful. I mean, I'm kind of what's going on there.
Well, the trolling aspect must never be discounted, but the president's dead serious about Greenland, and the blueprint for that is actually really good for all involved. It's even good for Denmark, even though they won't admit it, because Greenland costs them about $1 billion a year to get nothing. So it's much to their benefit not to have that problem. But we don't want to annex Greenland. And the president hasn't said this yet, but I assure you this is where things are going. The idea isn't for Greenland to be a state or a territory. The idea is for Greenland to become an independent country with a free association compact with the United States, just like what we have with Palau and the Marshall Islands. These are independent countries who get all the benefits of sovereignty and none of the costs. They don't have to have a military. They don't have to have embassies. They don't have to pay for any of that. America just takes care of it. So they're outsourcing their foreign policy because 3 people live there. And that's exactly Greenland's situation. There are 57,000 people in the entire Greenland area. So can they afford to have embassies in 195 countries? That's just absurd, and they're dependent on us for defense anyway. So we encourage them becoming independent. We sign a free association compact with them, as we have done with other countries, and they get their cake and eat it too. And we guarantee that the Chinese and the Russians don't get access to those resources or to those ports.
Well, again, this is all like comedic on some level. I have to ask, what do you think the Macrons in France, the German Starmer in the UK, what do you think they are thinking today?
Well, unlike a lot of leaders around the world, they're not too concerned about Delta Force showing up at their door, but they are aware that Trump means it. You know, this is the crucial thing. Donald Trump is underlining and highlighting the fact that we really are going to put American interests first, and we're not overly concerned about what white paper the Cato Institute put out last week saying that we have to follow these 47 steps. We're going to do what makes sense to the leaders of this country for the benefit of the people of this country. And yes, that will frequently benefit all of these other countries, but it's going to be Donald Trump's view of what benefits them, and you better play ball. So, you know, this has been the Trump doctrine as plain as day ever since the Saudi Arabia trip. You know, he makes the commerce, not chaos speech. And that was all about, you know, let's all be friends and work together and we can make each other rich. But the undertone was, and if you don't want to play ball, you get Fordo. And that's exactly what's happened. And that's what we just saw this weekend.
You get what?
Fordo, the bombing of the Iranian nuclear sites. You know, the Iranians could have had a deal too. Maduro could have had a deal too. There was absolutely an effort to get Maduro to just leave the country, and I'm sure we'd have set him up in a villa on the French Riviera like we did Baby Doc Duvalier, and, you know, all would have been well for him. But instead, he gets to be tried in a court of law in New York, and he's going to get convicted. And then we get to see, what does he really know about Smartmatic? And
I was just going to say, it's amazing
about the 2020
we're
election.
Almost 30 minutes
and will
in,
he make a plea deal?
And we have not discussed the stolen 2020 election, which it seems to me is probably behind everything in our going in Venezuela. The idea would be that, listen, evil actors who hate America have gone into Venezuela. They have done everything you can do to destroy America. They have pumped criminals across our borders. They have pumped fentanyl to kill our young people. They've done everything they can do, including steal our elections, which you might as well blow up the Statue of Liberty. They have stolen our elections. So if anybody knows about this, there's a guy in Brooklyn right now in a holding tank who knows about this. So it seems that—
and his wife.
It seems that their best bet would be to spill the beans. Now, I tell you, I would expect somebody from the deep state to want to kill them, honestly, at this point.
Very likely, but I don't think it will help them, because this is the dagger over the heads of the rest of the Venezuelan leadership. It's like, okay, we just indicted these 2 for conspiracy. Guess who their conspirators were? All of you. And we can arrest you and bring you to New York with them if you don't play ball. And I don't think Trump could have been any clearer on that point. So, you know, the reality is Venezuela stole its own election. That's well established. Nobody disagrees on that. Keir Starmer doesn't disagree. Joe Biden doesn't disagree. Jimmy Carter didn't disagree. So we know what they did there, and we know how they did it. And a lot of that was applicable to what was done in 2020. And it's not just those two countries. This scheme has been employed in multiple countries around the world, and it has to stop. And nobody is more laser focused on that than Donald Trump. So the worst case scenario, if all of this is wrong-headed and we're just completely wrong about 2020, okay, do you really want voting machines all over the world that are filled with Chinese software? Because that's what we found. There's no question these machines are being operated from Beijing. So just ending that problem is good for the world.
Do you think, I'm jumping here, do you think Comey and Brennan and company and Haspel are going to face justice with regard to all this? Because clearly they have involvement.
Well, I do. And it's difficult if you approach it in a normal fashion, because many of the things they did weren't actually crimes. And many of the other things they did are out of the statute of limitations. So you've got this procedural problem that Kash Patel and Pam Bondi have to grapple with. Now, how are they going to do that? That's actually pretty simple. That's what Kash was telling you middle of the year about this grand conspiracy approach, which if you can establish the basics of that, you can indict all of these people for everything, because that goes back in time to whenever it began, involves everyone who was a part of it and every one of their acts. And the statute of limitations runs from when the last action of the conspiracy took place. So that investigation is going on before a grand jury in South Florida. We should be able to get a fair trial down there, unlike, obviously, the Eastern District of Virginia and certainly the District of Columbia. And so you've got a real shot at all of these people. It would not surprise me if part of the information they're looking for is possessed by Nicolas Maduro, and that's going to be an important part of the grand conspiracy investigation. We'll see, but I'm guessing that's true.
So all the bad guys are sweating today, all of them.
They should be, yes.
Do you think Obama is sweating?
He initiated the conspiracy. I mean, that was plain as day. And Tulsi Gabbard couldn't have made it plainer in her presentations on this. So clearly, if Tulsi has anything to say about this, Barack Obama should be afraid.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary what we're seeing. Again, this is an historical earthquake right now that it's going to take us, decades to sort through the pieces of what is happening right now. It's like Mount St. Helens blowing. It is.
Yeah.
There's nothing to compare to this right now. I guess, we mentioned Iran. We mentioned Cuba, China. I mean, if you ever heard a mouse squeak, to hear President Xi say, I don't know what he said. He said something. China never seemed more impotent than when Xi said whatever he felt to save face he had to say. Trump didn't respond, probably won't respond, which is itself humiliating to the head of China.
Well, it really is. And as you know, East Asian cultures are all about face. So this means more to them than it would to us. The reality is there's not really anything she can do. And we're in an environment where his range of action is being more and more curtailed by the day. That's why he was willing to accept 47% U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods while only charging the United States 10. He didn't do that out of the goodness of his heart or because he's a bad deal maker. He did it because he didn't have a choice. The Chinese economy is built on exports. It doesn't function other than by exports. And we are the biggest import market on the planet. We're irreplaceable. There's no combination of countries that can possibly add up to even a major fraction of the United States when it comes to the need to export to us. So they're already in trouble there. It's just that they got a generation of American leaders to see that as China having power rather than the other way around. Well, Trump sees it correctly. We have created a monster. We have built a barbarous communist superpower for no good reason at all. And we've given them the means to develop the kind of military necessary to really turn that kinetic. And every single Trump action, it does not matter where in the world, it does not matter if it's domestic or foreign, every Trump action is taking account of that in a containment strategy not that different from George F. Kennan's, with the aim of not attacking China, not bombing China, but making it too expensive for China to bomb anybody else. And that puts them in a box where they have to play nice. And again, the net result of that can be we all get rich together. There's a limit on that, though, for China, which you have been brilliant at articulating for a very long time, which is the demographic collapse that comes from decades of forced abortions under the one-child policy. We now see the lowest adult cohort in China at about 50% of the numbers of the cohort just ahead of it. There's no way to pull out of that tailspin. China's on track to lose 75% of its population by the end of the century. And the truth of the matter is that hits sooner than later because you're going to have this huge bubble of retirees that have to be supported by an ever-shrinking number of young people. And there's just no way to solve that problem. So it's true. We see the dark factories that, they're called dark because you don't need lights. It's all robots and you don't need people to run them. Okay, that's fine. But that just doubles down on your export economy without any new consumption in China because robots don't buy cars and houses. And so their
most of them don't have
solutions
children.
actually make it worse.
I was going to say there's another dynamic before we go. This applies to Iran and China both. There has been Christian revival. Again, this is underground in Iran, in China, gigantic Christian revival in Iran, in China. Those people have been praying. It seems to me that China is on the ropes, that China, that she is probably hoping to hang on to power. I mean, that's really all he can do at this point, but it's not looking good. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see Christians emerge in Iran, in China. I don't know when this is going to happen, but I just have a sense that things are playing out along these lines because we don't have time to get into it right now. But ladies and gentlemen, in case you're wondering, the best of, capitalism, the free markets, the best of a free nation where people govern themselves, that all comes from Christian roots. There is no other way you get there. You cannot get there with the Enlightenment, with some secular equation. You cannot get there, and you will not get there. And America came into being because of Christian faith. Our liberties, including religious liberty to not believe in the Christian faith, comes from the Christian faith. All of this stuff leads to all that other good stuff. And I think we're seeing some of this played out. And again, I just find it comedic almost that Mamdani has just become mayor of New York City as all of this stuff is happening around the world. I don't know what's going to happen with him. I predict he will fail tremendously. by the grace of God. Rod, before we go, any final thoughts? There's so much here. I just want to talk to you for days.
I just want to say it's going to be a great year, barring, the sweet meteor of death or something. We're about to have an incredible supply side boom. This is already happening. You see it in the GDP numbers in Q3 and Q4. That's going to start touching everyone from the tall to the small as we reduce housing prices and food prices, and we create all these new jobs that are going to come from $18 trillion in new investment in manufacturing in America, which they all told us could never, ever come back. Well, yes, it can, and it is. So this is going to be a great year for every American except Zoran Mandami. And my guess is it's going to be a great year for Republicans in November.
I forgot to say happy Super Centennial. This is the Super Centennial year of the United States of America, folks. This year will be, like 1861, like 1776. There's a new birth of freedom happening. I think that Lincoln spoke those words prophetically. A new birth of freedom happening, and we get to see it. It is a war. We're in a war, but God has created us for this hour to be warriors for his purposes in history. Praise his name. Rod Martin, just a joy to speak with you, my friend. Thanks for being here.
And you. Happy New Year.